wanted to add something too, but
Sure.
You want to
Well, I
ask
just, responding to what Letitia was talking about, specifically for Bayview Hunters Point, I don't know how do everyday citizens, black or not black, you gave the sense that there's distrust of the police. And part of the reason there's distrust of the police is because they don't live in the neighborhood. So are the people who live in Bayview Hunters Point aware of the police commission, aware of the mechanisms, and are there a lot of bad things happening despite all the procedures that shouldn't be happening? I don't even know what are the real police shootings? Are there real police shootings happening frequently in Bayview Hunters Point? Could you comment on that?
I would say that there is a heavier presence of police officers in the Bayview because of the fact that there are more people of color and it's seen as a bad neighborhood. And when it has that stigma, then I feel like it becomes more socially acceptable for there to be so many police in one area. And I think that as far as police involved incidences, I know like Kenneth Harding, he was murdered in 2011 by SFPD on 3rd Street in the Bayview. He was shot multiple times and the video is on YouTube, you can see it. And he was a 19-year-old and that happened in the Bayview. And so the sense that, this happens across the country, that you can shoot somebody and be the judge, the jury, and the executioner, and giving one person that power to murder black and brown people is not okay. And those things happen so frequently in black and brown communities. So whether it happens once a year, once every other year, those things should never be allowed to happen. And I think that that's where the accountability comes in and the retraining and police being taught to de-escalate situations. Another incident happened around New Year's Eve this year where a police officer knocked a disabled man out of his wheelchair. I don't know if you guys seen that video. You can watch that on YouTube as well. SFPD pushed a man out of his wheelchair. And why are things like that happening when these people are here to protect the community and protect the citizens? Our money goes to their salary, and so they should be here to serve us. Again, it should be like the fire department. They should never be here to harm us. We should be able to call them and come when we need help. They should never be here to be the ones harming.
Yeah, and
I want to hear your.
Well, an additional incident, if you all read in the paper, there was a police officer that was on disability, and he was arrested by other officers. Right? Was this in the Bayview also? You remember this news report? There's a police officer that was on medical leave who was arrested by other officers because he was basically correcting officers on the questions and the policies they were using when they were engaging him. So they ended up arresting him, and they didn't know he was an officer. And he tried to explain to them, this African American police officer, that I am an officer. And I had forgotten about this until a police officer last week reminded me of it. I was talking to a police officer at an event that I was at about this amount of mistrust in the community. Petra highlights a lot of the sort of services that are entangled in some of our community work. We have officers in schools. We have some coaches that are police officers that work with our youth, but the quality of those programs is still very questionable. The extent that police officers actually participate in that is still very low. And so if we talk about policy that makes a requirement, 20% of officers' time should be out of uniform, working in the community that they're policing, where they're given opportunities to engage with community in a new and interesting way. Because that, I think, is a great way to build relationships. It will translate over to how they engage when they're on their beat, and all the stuff around, not having the requirements in place. That's why we have a commission, right?
Right.
We should be working with them to implement some of this stuff. And the last thing that I'll say is, if you all are people familiar with Malcolm Gladwell, you wrote all these books, Tipping Point. He has this lecture where he talks about a policing policy that was happening in New York, where the police officers are actually following kids' social media messages and finding out they were admitting to a lot of crimes that they were doing over social media. Police officers went to the parents of these kids saying, like, listen, can you help us? We know your kid is up to X, Y, and Z. Parents didn't trust the police officer. They didn't get any support. So as a result, the police decided to, on Thanksgiving and Christmas, go into housing projects and give turkeys to everyone in their home. And the people broke down and cried, and they built all these trusting relationships, and that sort of set a new tone for how they were engaging with the community that they serve. So, I mean, we have things that are happening across the country that are really interesting. We have things that we can point to that are happening in San Francisco, but I would say that, that doesn't tell the full story. So I think there are a lot of opportunities is what I'm saying, and a lot of ways we need to improve.
Well, let me just correct something. I just want to add something and kind of correct something. I mean, the baby is 6% African American. It's mostly Asian, actually now. One of the things that the officers, one of the things the police are using is CompStat. And last week, for instance, 19 shots fired at the Bayview, and a young mother was shot in the head and died right there. So what we do is what they call smart policing, is where there is activity that needs policing, that's where we put a lot of the resources. So, coming from the Mission District, I know sometimes it feels like we're under siege. I know that mentality, but I also understand that we need to put the resources where the crime activity is occurring. We have 4 people shot in the Western Addition, a lot of shots rang out there, and we have to put the resources where the crimes occur.
I also think that it's important that instead of money going to militarizing police departments, paying for sick leave or paid leave when they get in trouble, I think that it would be better to invest that money into youth development programs and ways to stop violence in the community, because so the reason why the Bayview is 6% African American at this point, from being historically 60% African American, is because of gentrification, because of gang injunctions, because of the prison industrial complex and black and brown youth being locked up all the time, and people being displaced from their homes. Because if you commit a crime and you live in the housing projects, even if your grandmother is on the lease, you get kicked out of your housing projects. And so what that means is that black and brown people are being pushed out of the city on top of being brutalized by the police. And so if we could have more money going towards programs that combat that violence, and also that same day that the mother was murdered in the Bayview, a young black male was murdered in the Bayview 10 minutes before that, and the conversation is never about him. Although both of those lives were lost, I think that there's something to say about the fact that no one talks about the young black male that was murdered 10 minutes before.
Okay, and I'm going to have Ross Murphy, Sheriff Murphy, join the conversation. All right, welcome. Nice to see you also. And if you could just, we know who you are, but just a little brief something about who you are, what you do, and what you feel your relationship is to our overall discussion about whether or not here in San Francisco we are holding ourselves accountable for things that occur, so that we don't have another Ferguson or Staten Island.
Nice to see everybody, and I'm sorry I'm a little bit late. I was at the Petro Hill Democratic Club, and there is a forum like this going on, and I was speaking at that, so I was glad I was able to come over and make it. I'm Ross Murphy. I'm the sheriff of the city and county of San Francisco, and I'm a former supervisor of this district, District 5. I was the supervisor here for 7 years. Relative, I think, to your question, speaks to the experience that I had here as supervisor. When I was elected to office here, this district had the second highest homicide and violent crime rate for 20 years. And I felt that that was a result of the apathy of the community, because just how deflated the community was, because there was no interruption in that violent crime rate, and with law enforcement in City Hall who were kind of shrugging their shoulders, acting like that's just the norm of the Fillmore and the Western Addition. I wouldn't accept it. And if some of you may recall, I legislated, it was extremely unorthodox for a legislator to do this, but I legislated a prescription of what community policing was going to look like in demanding that the police department, like this station, walk beats in some of the most distressed areas of the Fillmore and Western Addition, in public housing in areas where they would never get out of their car. And the reason I did that was because not just to be there to show a level of police presence, but because what was central to where there was so many breaches of where communities were experiencing violent crime was the lack of trust between law enforcement, government, and the communities in which they were going to serve. So having some level of continuity where they were held accountable, law enforcement, and concurrently when we were installing programs, literally in public housing and surrounding communities where people were coming out of the jail and the prison so there would be better reintegration back in the communities. By that time, our legislation became so controversial that Mayor Newsom vetoed it. But I delivered the first veto override of his career as mayor. And I got exactly what I wanted. And for 2 years, we were able to get the kind of community policing, not exactly, on the A level I wanted it, but better than really almost any other district in this district. And there was a quantifiable improvement where community was really at the helm, not police. Community policing is about community is at the helm, and we come with it. And just in December, I went and met with President Obama's point person on community policing, Ron Davis. Ron Davis is the director for the federal government community-oriented policing strategies. And I knew that in the wake of Ferguson and Staten Island and Cleveland and others, while there was this new sort of outcry, for community policing and body cams and everything like this, I thought it was a complete miss. They were not talking about the very same strategies for inside the prisons and jails. I'll tell you who's one of the best practitioners of community policing, the deputy who walks the line in the jail system every single day, who has a relationship with the people who are in their custody, who they see 24/7, who are developing the kind of rapport that can make or break what that existence is going to look like while they're in our custody. And the same people that go back out in the communities, well, they'll take that experience with them. So I was saying it's a miss for the federal government to be talking about upgrading strategies in public, but excluding the question of what happens inside prisons and jails, just like body cameras. I mean, body cameras is something that I think should happen. I don't think it's a cure-all by any stretch of the imagination, but I thought it was a miss that they didn't have talking about body cameras for our deputies inside jails, or who governs prisons and jails. Death in custodies, for example, that should be a very transparent moment. And if cameras inside a jail or a prison don't pick up, where there is that potential abuse that does happen, or where there's questionable deaths or violence inside of a jail system, a body camera would do very good here. I think San Francisco has shifted away from real community policing. I would like people to consider the assets that are underutilized in San Francisco to help with community policing. I'll give you an example. I preside over the second largest law enforcement agency in the city. Never does anybody entering the discussion when I'm hearing these clarion calls, we need 200 more police, let's hire the police. Well, I've got deputy sheriffs who are trained in the exact same vein, and they're paid 24% less, and it's a taxpayer boon. If you want to have extra beats on the uni bus, you want people to walk, in public housing or distressed community, you want to go into neighborhoods where others won't go, we're eager, and we're willing to work with community. And I think that that's a factor that isn't often calculated into what is before us that we can actually deploy. And the reason I'm able to say this is, whether you know this or not, I preside over the most undercrowded jail system in the United States. In 3 years, our jail population has plummeted by 50%. Our ceiling is 2,450. Our count today is under 1,200. There is no other county system in the United States that sees a jail population transforming as fast as ours. And while January is certainly a cause for concern of the uptick in crime and violence, nothing to turn our back on, certainly I won't I am liking the indicators overall in the last few years, even with state prisoner realignment, where the governor was required to bring back prisoners from the state because of overcrowding to all 58 counties. And yet still, when they were projecting doom and gloom of overcrowded conditions with an added population, we defied the odds with absolutely an undercrowded jail system. Never before in the history of San Francisco have we been in this position. So when I wrote the mayor a letter, he didn't write back, and I suggested that let's use our know-how and apply it into areas where we really are vulnerable in communities, then I'm making ourselves available. It used to be the requirement in the city that every new institution that was built would have a psych bed. And so what I'm seeing is this sort of, cutting corners around all this great growth and prosperity of San Francisco, and looking back at the foundation of what I think needs to be the kind of San Francisco that we all have really wanted to live to its promise. And I think that is for another discussion.
Yeah, I think you're probably right, and that was gonna be my last question to the panel, to each of you. Could you give us your suggestions on how we keep this conversation going? Because we have a tendency to all get together when there's a crisis, or it comes to our consciousness, and then it kind of flows away, and then until the next one comes up, and then it flows away again. But I think this is I believe, this is such a big issue, and it's not an issue that's gonna go away soon, and it doesn't lend itself to quick and, 2-second bite solutions. So how do we keep this conversation going about making sure that we have policies here and procedures here in the city of San Francisco that possibly we can export at some time to make sure that people feel they're getting justice, that the system is transparent enough for us, for all of us. So I'll start with Supervisor Murphy. I started with that end of the table. Sheriff. Sorry, he was my supervisor. Sheriff.
It was a labor of love, being super. Well, first of all, I'll give you all my business card if you want it. So there's one way of staying in contact, and something I learned as a supervisor, it might seem a little mild or cliche, but the Sheriff's Department didn't even have a newsletter, so we started one, and it's a monthly at least report of what we do. I think you'd be surprised the kind of range our department has. It's more than just about doing jails. It does a lot. Only 50% of our budget is related to the jail system. So that's one of it. The other is when there is a community discussion like this and others, ask yourself who's missing from the table. I think this discussion about community policing, I think public health, the public health department has a very serious slice of the pie. I think the sheriff's department has a slice of the pie. I think the adult and juvenile probation departments have a slice of the pie, and so on. I do not put all these answers on the police department. And I don't believe that it's fair to them to simply answer singularly how to solve these issues. But that's what's missing at City Hall, is that there isn't the required dynamic of putting us in the room together and nobody can leave until you figure it out. And that hasn't happened. And I think that that's a problem, because what that does is it frays at the fabric, I think, at communities where they really feel vulnerable or in distress, and that isn't happening.
Thank you. Stephen?
Yeah, well, I appreciate the opportunity to be out here with all of you tonight. Obviously, we didn't solve racial injustice in America in this discussion.
We haven't even had that conversation.
But that is the heart of this conversation. I don't think that we talked enough about race tonight, but it is central to this issue, and it's usually people of color bringing up the topic of race, and so we sort of hold that responsibility to advance that. I think our white allies, and I said our friends, also talking about race and the importance of it, and dynamics like this are critical. The important thing to remember is that there is no silver bullet. Policing policy will not change everything that we want to see happen in our communities. But it is, like the sheriff was saying, a slice of the pie. Our schools are a big slice of that pie. And the way that we talk about income inequality and food injustice, right, health disparities, all these things contribute to these two worlds that we have that are especially stark in San Francisco. So if we're gonna find a way to do it, I think San Francisco has to be the place that we do it because the resources are so great and the inequality is so large and the willingness, because we're such a liberal city, should be here. So I think it's important for us to remember that we are the ones in charge, and that if we want to see a change happen, it's going to be that we have the agency to take it on. A lot of people in this room decided to come out on a Tuesday night. You're informed citizens. I see a lot of people involved in politics. What the sheriff said about bringing people to the table is key, but realizing your agency and advancing this discussion, especially in places where they don't want to have it, I think it's going to be the way that we continue to turn this corner. We bring people into the discussion and we confront our friends on issues of racial inequality, and we arm ourselves with information so we can talk about it comfortably. And we show up to things like this, right, and bring our friends along too.
Thank you.
So the organizing work that I do around Black Lives Matter is geared particularly towards community re-infrastructure and reinvestment, and how can we create long-term sustainable organizations and programs and workshops within Black and brown communities that will allow us to flourish long-term. So policy is just one leg of this movement, this Black Lives Matter movement that's currently happening. But Black love also matters. Black mental care, healthcare, having these conversations around how can we begin to heal as a community, and so that's the work that I do, and having conversations with our community about the racism, like Stevon is saying, and police brutality and policies that are happening are important conversations to have, because a lot of people just don't know. A lot of people don't have access to education, and I call myself and my friends roses from concrete. I'm from Hunters Point, but I'm not the standard, if you will. I'm not what people assume to have come from Hunters Point. People get surprised when they hear me speak. They say, oh, you're so articulate, and all of these things, because they assume that a Black person from Hunters Point can't be beautiful and educated. And I think that the conversation needs to be about that. Our community, we want more for ourselves. We want love, we want peace, and that's all we're asking for and what we're fighting for. And so the work that I do with the community is to help ensure that we have those things long term. Even when the lights are off and no one's talking about Black Lives Matter, we should still be talking about Black Lives Matter as a community.
So one of the things is the San Francisco Police Department has got a grant for cameras. It's in the infant stages. It's a short-term kind of thing. But I do think in terms of a policy has to be put in place for those cameras, and it would be good if we get some Black, brown, and activist people on a committee to meet with us about the policy, what policy should be put in place. Now, it's a pilot.
She's right next to
Right,
you.
no, that's why I'm tense on telling you, because that's where policy could matter, you know. And the second thing is, you know, President Obama talked about the task force on 21st century policing. That should be supported, as well as funding. We need the funding so we can actually put the community policing in place and make it work for us. And you know, for us in the commission, we can revisit the old report, just what we're not doing, and make it happen, and perhaps then also maybe put a committee together to talk about what new policies have been developed, or our new ideas are outside the box that maybe we can implement. And we should really rally the mayor or the board of supervisors for I agree with you, for younger blood, fresher blood, you know, Black Lives Matter representative on there or something like that. But I think they should have active participation on this commission, because this commission is a very powerful commission, you know. And so, and then the last thing is we talked about is changing some of the laws so we can get more transparency in the outcome of these shootings and disciplinary hearings. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you very much. If you could be the
help us be
Help us be self-sufficient, right? And if they take that away from us, that's like, come on.
like you're saying.
Why are they taking from the bottom of the bottom? They already have money.
If weed is made legal in the USA, we're saying to make those, the government strains in Tennessee that have been around for a long time, that growing, they grew for like 9 or 11
G13
people.
and the rest of the
G13.
government.
That's a good strain, G13.
Yeah, because they took the best of the best from the best growers and they manipulated
Yeah.
that seed.
Yeah, government 13. And if it's made legal in the USA, we should make those strains in Tennessee legal to
It was
everyone.
Mississippi and,
Buy the seed.
well, there's a couple different universities that they let do it, but the, Mississippi was the main one, I believe.
Oh, it's
that,
Mississippi, not Tennessee?
Yeah, I believe
Okay.
it's Mississippi.
Oh,
It's
I'm
either
sorry,
Mississippi,
my
it's one
error.
of the southern states. I don't think it's Tennessee though. But anyway, that whole thing stemmed from the theft of these seeds from California. A lot of those strands would not even, the government wouldn't have access to them. And that's why I say the hippies foul. They let them infiltrate and take these products away from us. And now they want to take these products and sell them on the market themselves. This is why marijuana is not legal now. Because they don't have a way to take the seeds away, one, permanently where we can't make our own product. And two, how are they going to market it? It's us that buy it. They can't sell to us like that. We can sell to us, but they can't. And that's a big part of the problem, is they haven't figured out a way to completely make it a monopoly to where poor people aren't having a lucrative income for marijuana project. So they got a lot of ways that they make us suffer. One is Social Security, another one is welfare, another one is the medical industry. You can't go in and get a transplant. I have a lot of medical problems. I might need a transplant soon. And imagine me going in there and not being able to get a transplant because I'm a medical cannabis patient and an outspoken one at that. So I think that, you know, like she said, and Ken was a dear friend of mine. I really love the guy. It's on the day before he left to the hospital.
You were so kind to
It's
him.
so hard, you know, understanding these things that are so serious to us patients. I have very serious illnesses. Without the marijuana, I'm sick in bed and hating it, you know, and I'm sorry, but this is a plant that's given me a freedom in life to choose my own direction, to be able to do things that I want to do in my life that make me feel better. Why don't I have that in America, especially in California, especially in San Francisco, which is supposed to be our sanctuary city here, St. Francis? Wake up, people, because it is time to not only legalize the herb, but stop, you know, with the hatred towards the people who are trying to do something good in a low income and no income community. They've chased all the clinics out of the Tenderloin district, where the sickest of the sickest are. Now there's a greater need. You know, they're not. It's not creating a better way for the medical
They're
cannabis
creating a black
community.
market.
Exactly.
There's people selling it all over there. It's easier to buy it off the street